Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to how the ice pick killer was finally caught.
His was an interesting case in that he had gone to prison for murder, but what ultimately sent him to death row was the murder he had committed prior to the murder that actually sent him to prison. I know that gets kind of confusing, but what sent him to death row was the 1979 murder of Inez Deaton. She was raped, stabbed with an ice pick, and her body left near a bayou. And it was awful what happened to this poor young lady, and no real rhyme or reason for it.
And where did that happen?
Here in Harris County.
Okay.
So in 1979, he's at a house in Harris County, relative's house, one of his relatives' house. Inez just stopped by to use the phone. No real reasoning behind it. He just attacked her, raped her, and killed her right there, and then dumped her by the side of a bayou. Actually, some of the accounts, it looked like she had kind of been posed like a broken mannequin was the term. And that murder went unsolved for about 20 years.
So she went over. Did she know anyone at the house, or she just kind of
An acquaintance.
Okay.
An acquaintance. Just stopped by to use the phone. Remember, it's 1979. That's not that unusual.
She comes in the house, you're in the living room, dining room area. Did any conversation take place? I don't remember any conversation. You know she came to the house door? Tell me what happened then.
And so when she went in there, was the acquaintance that she knew was there?
No.
So he was the only one in the
correct,
house,
at that
so
time.
he didn't feel encumbered to not.
Right. He felt like he could do what he do, and then he puts her in the trunk and cleans up the best he can, and then dumps her body.
You remember loading her in the car?
Oh my goodness.
And then he took off. Shortly after her body was found and it hit the news, he took off after that, got out of town.
So how long before she was found?
A few days.
Okay.
It wasn't very long.
Okay.
Because he dumped her by the bayou, but it wasn't like she was hidden. I mean, somebody saw her.
Okay. What bayou was it? I'm just trying to think of, people who may live
Green's Bayou.
Wow.
Development's different now. There
Right.
wasn't a lot out there at the time. Now there's more.
Mm-hmm. So that's the first murder he committed in 1979.
Right. Went unsolved.
Went unsolved. No one knew he did anything. And then how did he come up on the radar to end up on death row?
That's an awful, very jagged trail. In 1983, so 4 years after he kills Inez in Palo Pinto County, which is Mineral Wells. He's driving down the road in his van. Of course, because what good serial killer doesn't drive a van?
You were out there, and you saw him walking on the side of the road, and you were driving in your van. You picked her up. Is that correct? That's how we were, and you saw him walking and picked her up.
He attacks her, kills her, disposes of the body, goes back to her place where her roommate and her roommate's son are. And this is strange at this point because it's not really clear why. But he winds up pushing the roommate who's holding her child down the stairs.
Oh my God.
Kills them both.
What was her condition at that time? Was she saying anything? Was she moving?
And he eventually got caught for the one murder in Palo Pinto County. He gets sentenced to prison, 25 years. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, this was under the old mandatory release laws. So he basically does 8 years of a 25-year sentence for murder and gets paroled.
But he wasn't convicted of murder in the 2 deaths of the mother and the child?
No, just one. It was very unclear in the records because now we're going back to 1983. It's a rural county. It was very difficult to try and understand what was going on at that time. But he gets the one, goes to prison. Like I said, gets the 25-year sentence and gets paroled in 8 because of the old mandatory release laws that don't exist anymore. As far as the murders go, it's believed that's it. In terms, there's Inez, and then there's the 3 in one day in 1983. But none of that includes just the massive list of robberies, assaults, sexual assaults. I mean, he was accused of sexually assaulting 5 of his own relatives. And you had asked what finally put him on the radar that eventually led him to death row. Okay. So he's in Louisiana at this time, West Baton Rouge Parish. And he's staying at a Super 8 motel with his son. And he talks about one night he's drinking and playing video games. And it's kind of weird in the way he described it in his confession tape. He apparently had an altercation with somebody else staying at this motel. And whatever reason, felt kind of bad, went to knock on the guy's door and say, hey, look, sorry for the dust up. So he goes to do that. Then he drinks some more. Then he goes back. But this time when he goes back to that room, there's a woman in the room. When the door opened, I went right on in. And when I came, I heard this young lady yell kind of like startled. And pushed her on the bed. And I told her, please be quiet, you know, so I'm not going to hurt that. And pretty much, I guess, like he's done his whole life, he saw her and the urge hit him, and boom, he attacks her. And just, I mean, really, you know, beats her and tries to rape her. One of the accounts was he couldn't maintain an erection, which made him even angrier. So he ties her up, tries to shove her in a duffel bag. She doesn't quite fit in the duffel bag, so that makes him angrier. And through the grace of God, she's finally able to escape. But this whole time, he's like telling the police, oh, you know, I just told her I don't want to hurt you. Sorry, I don't want to hurt you. But yet he's tying her up. He's zip tied her and trying to shove her in a duffel bag.
After beating her and attempting to rape her.
Correct.
You know the purpose of why you would be trying to put her in those bags? No. The purpose of it.
She, like I said, by the grace of God, gets away. He takes off into the wind. He's finally caught over in Florida for that case. They bring him in, and I guess he just decided to start talking. And so the detectives in West Baton Rouge Parish get his confession for what he did at the motel, but then he also confessed to Inez.
So if it wasn't for him assaulting that woman, her getting away, him fleeing, and then getting extradited back, and him just deciding to open up about all this, they would not have known that he killed Inez.
No. Matter of fact, when it finally came out that this guy over in West Baton Rouge Parish had confessed to the murder of Inez Deaton, and we got word of it in the media, I remember talking to Captain Don McWilliams with the sheriff's office at the time, because it was a county case, and he said, yeah, we're sending detectives over there immediately because this guy is an unknown to us. I mean, they had zero clue that he had done this.
And based off of those confession tapes, which I want to dig in a little bit more on, but did he give any indication as to, you know, why he decided to come forward with it? Was he just, I don't know if serial killers get tired of running, but
that's my guess. I mean, there was no specific, this is why I'm finally going to let loose with all this. It was just, you could tell, and even when you listen to him, I mean, it was really hard to understand him because he mumbled quite a bit in those confession tapes, and he spoke very low, and you could tell, I don't know how to put this, there were parts of those tapes where when the detectives were asking him, okay, so you did this, then what did you do? I don't know if he felt remorse or some kind of shame, but there were a lot of things where he would confess enough to confess to what he did, but then he didn't want to go into detail. Like he would say, I don't recall. Well, what did you do after that? I don't remember. Did you rape her before you killed her? Long pause. I don't recall. I mean, there were weird gaps like that, but he said enough. And I remember in the evidence room, in his box of trial exhibits, there was his written confession. I recall going into the kitchen and grabbing what I believed was an ice pick. And that was about the only time I ever saw where he expressed some type of remorse for the things that he had done.
Really?
And that was it.
Do you remember what he said?
remorse for what he had done. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Literally.
Yeah. No, I wasn't putting out words. He literally said I do have some remorse for what I did, but that was really it.
I just want to circle back. So the reason he got the name the Ice Pick Killer was really just related to his first murder.
Actually, two.
Okay.
In the 1983 murders, he used an ice pick too. It was there.
Both.
Now, it was interesting. They never found the murder weapon
in the first one.
In either of the cases.
Oh, okay.
What's in the trial exhibit, the evidence box, is an ice pick, but it was used for demonstration to the jury.
So he just said, like, I used the ice pick.
Mm-hmm. Well, you could see from the autopsy reports. I mean, Inez was stabbed like 11 times. Yeah, and I mean, you could tell based on the wounds that he wasn't making up the ice pick part of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So all those years go by, 4 years. He would not have been caught. It seems like had it not been for the fact that he came forward and confessed as a result of the assault on that woman.
Correct. Now he got a life sentence in Louisiana for what he did to the woman at the motel.
Okay.
So he theoretically would be serving a life sentence in Louisiana State Prison right
if he
now.
Had just stayed
if he
quiet
had
on that.
just shut up. Yeah.
Instead, he confessed, and Harris County investigators went down there to pick him up.
Yeah, they went down there to pick him up. Louisiana's like, absolutely. I mean, you've got this unsolved murder. Take him, and the way these things work, a death penalty is going to supersede another state's punishment.
Okay.
And so while it's not like Louisiana's like, no, he needs to serve his life sentence before you can take it back. So clearly they just like, no, just keep it.
And one of the other points I wanted to go back to is you referenced he had a son and that he was married.
And a daughter.
And a daughter.
Plus, I had trouble, with my marriage at that particular time, and I was, just distressed and upset and drinking real heavy.
In the confession, he was talking about the night that he attacked the woman at the Super 8. He was all agitated because he hadn't been able to get a hold of his daughter, and he said, no, I'm having, trouble with my marriage. I know, shock, this guy had a bad marriage. That's just completely out of the blue. But yeah, I mean, he had a son and a daughter, and at one point was married.
One of the things that when you watch horror movies or serial killer shows or anything like that, because I know that's super popular, my worst fear is to kind of end up in a situation where you're being like attacked and like raped or things like that.
Oh,
but then I can't even imagine like being with a partner. You're finding out your partner is capable of committing all those horrible acts.
Right.
I don't know, did the family ever testify or did they ever know anything?
I never saw any testimony from family members. And there were family members for victims that showed. We didn't speak to them. They chose not to speak, which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
The brother, Pamela Hudgens, did send a brief statement, and essentially is like, I'm happy to know that this man will now rot in hell for eternity. And that was the gist of the statement from the brother.
Wow.
Yeah.
It wasn't a straight shot to death row.
No, because you think about it, you have Inez murdered in 1979. He beats feet out of town after her body is found. In 1983, you have the three people, two women and a child, murdered in a single day. He goes to prison for one of those murders, gets out, bounces around, is accused at one point of kidnapping an 11-year-old girl, accused of sexually assaulting a family member. I mean, this whole deal. And then it wasn't until 1998 that he was finally caught. So we're talking 19 years from Inez's murder and 15 years from the murder. Eight of those years he was in prison.
And that's what just boggles my mind. It's like you talked about Inez's murder, which went unsolved, the 3 people murdered, the numerous assaults, the alleged kidnapping, robberies, rapes.
You don't have to worry about alleged with this guy. Yeah. I mean, he's an awful human being. Yeah.
So all these criminal cases against him, and how he continues to get out.
He moved around a lot, and in those days it was easier to kind of get lost. So after he gets convicted in 2003, talk about a bizarre turn of events. The prison transport van is taking him from the county to death row gets involved in a head-on collision. That crash killed a prison guard and put Bible in a wheelchair. His attorneys have argued the injuries from that crash and a host of other medical problems should have made Bible ineligible for lethal injection. As he gets older, he develops this galaxy of health issues, problems. He really couldn't get around much without the aid of a wheelchair. And so his attorneys argued, one, he's no longer a future threat, because you know that for a jury to give somebody the death penalty, they have to determine that if they do not get the death penalty, they would be a continuing danger and a continuing threat. So they argue, well, he can't be. He's just basically this infirmed old man now, so he's not a threat to anybody. And then the other argument was, given his health conditions, they're going to have real trouble finding a vein. And so we believe that their attempts to find a vein will, for lack of a better term, cause them to have to poke around a lot, which in our legal opinion constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Obviously, none of those arguments held up. They were all rejected. And when I witnessed his execution, I remember asking the director of communications for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice at the time, Jeremy Diesel, I said, did you have trouble finding? He goes, no, we did not.
Do you remember what his last words were?
He didn't have any.
Really?
He did say he could feel it burning going in, which is the second time I've heard an inmate say that. But that's not uncommon for the type of drug that goes in. There's that brief moment of a stinging sensation. Like, and there was no, and I don't want anybody to get misunderstand this. There was no crying out in pain or anything, nothing at all like that. There was
just a remark that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it was a remark like, oh, I can feel that. Yeah.
Who was the other one that you remember?
Shore. Anthony Allen Shore.
He's
a tourniquet killer.
Okay.
And his very, very last words were, ooh, wee, it really does. Bibles was, he remarked that he felt it burn.
Okay. What a convoluted path to that.
What an awful path of carnage this man lived. I mean, there wasn't a place that he went that he didn't cause some type of pain.
In the confession tapes, though, were there anything that stood out to you when listening to them about like what he described or what he admitted to?
Two things. One is very personal as a husband and a father, that there are people in this world that will just act on these urges. And that's what happened with Inez. That's what happened with the two ladies and the child in Palo Pinto County. They were there. He wanted to do it, and he did it. Same thing with the lady at the Super 8 motel in Louisiana. And that's very frightening that you will have people walking around amongst us that just, I want that, and I'm going to have it. And it's scary to think that. The other thing was, and this is purely my opinion, but he almost seemed embarrassed to admit to the detectives. It was almost like, wow, now that I'm saying this out loud, this really is awful what I've done. I mean, pure opinion on my part, but they really, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand. He wasn't coerced. Matter of fact, there's video of him being magistrated.
In 12/18/98, accused also confessed to 4 murders in Texas, 2 other rapes, and again, the court outright.
Now, he later claimed that he didn't think they would be used against him in court, but that to me was like, how can you not think that, especially since they're literally recording it? Right. And then when you hear people like Danny Bible or Anthony Allen Shore confess, and they talk about how it was there, I wanted it, I took it. Yeah. I mean, you realize what I try to tell people about this job that we have. It makes you paranoid. It really does make you paranoid. And it's not that we think it's going to happen, but we know what is possible. Right. Because we've seen what is possible. We read the documents. Yes. You hear the confessions. You go to the court cases. You go deep into the cases. You see the photos, the videos. Just thinking about all the stuff that you guys had really that were in his exhibit. Oh, really? There were still the exhibits, and reading Inez's autopsy report. It's hard to wrap your head around how people do this. Right. So that was the Ice Pick Killer, but this has been a short season, I think, for our first one. But it's a learning experience. We've never done anything like this before. Well, how have you? I would like to know, because you've been our leader. How have you seen this evolve from where we started to where we are now?
I mean, I think back to that day when we went to the evidence room for the first time. This was before this project was even in inception.
Yeah, the Carl Wayne Bunchen execution.
When we went for the Carl Wayne Bunchen execution, and it was just an eerie feeling, and you know, that whole room, like, as like interesting it is, like I wanted to go through every single box because I'm so fascinated by it, and like again, you will never get the answer, but I want to know like why, how. And I think that's what the intrigue is for the evidence room. And so that was kind of, I think, an overwhelming goal for us is to not to celebrate these people. I think we've done a good job of that.
Yeah.
But like really try and unpack the impacts that they've had on people's lives in like the city of Houston. And then just going back to it, like meeting Rhonda and being in that room with her during that time, you know, it was just so fascinating to like see her in her element. You know, she was much more laid back when we first met her, like when we weren't recording for this series, but it was really interesting just to like see how organized she was and, you know, how she really had that wall up to protect herself.
You have to, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, when you're around that much death, you have to.
And I mean, that's kind of goes into our jobs as well. You know, you have to put up those shields at times because it can impact you. As I was watching the first episode, the documentary on Rhonda and the evidence room itself, the scale of all those boxes and realizing that, yeah, there's probably multiple boxes per case. Some of them maybe it's just one or a file, but just knowing that how much violent crime happens.
Also, too, to me, what strikes me is the frightening nature of the everyday. And you're walking through, and things that are in there are like shovels, brooms, bed frames, stoves, all connected to these horrific acts. And so it's amazing how everyday objects can suddenly be just so frightening to see.
What do you want to do next?
William Reese. And again, it's somewhat personal for me. I have covered that man since 1997, when 12-year-old Laura Kate Smither disappeared jogging a quarter of a mile from her home and was found about 3 weeks later in a retention pond. At that time, nobody had any idea. It would literally be up until the year 2022 before her case and several others were all finally put to rest. I would like people to understand the pain and the horror that William Reese caused in the fight that Laura's parents continue to do, in the good that came from these horrible things, because they were not going to let their children die for nothing, for no reason. So
stay tuned for season 2 because I feel like that's a powerful story. There are obviously a lot of powerful stories.
The killing fields.
We
talked about the killing fields. Yeah. Most people do not realize that the entire reason the Texas Equisearch exists was because Tim Miller's daughter is one of the victims of the killing fields.
And so I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of stories out there that need to be told. I think on a more micro level, and I'm really proud of this team for working on this project and being so successful with it, but also like handling it with care. I'm interested to see where we go next with it, and I think Evidence Room season 2 will be coming soon.
If you have a case you want us to see, let us know. I mean, seriously, we've gotten a few that have come in. If there's a case you want us to know or you feel deserves to be highlighted, please let us know. You can reach us via email, via the website, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, any of the ways that we are pushing this out.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of great comments actually with some of them. So those are definitely, for those of you who commented, they are on the list for sure.
We'd really like to thank everybody for coming on this journey with us. This has been new for us. We've had 6 episodes of the Evidence Room. If you haven't had a chance to see them all, you can find them on YouTube, on click2houston.com, or on our streaming device, KVRC2+. And as our executive producer, Anna Loster, said, after the first of the year, we will have season 2 coming. So stay tuned. And again, thank you. Her son remained calm as the judge read the sentence, death by execution. Josue Flores was murdered last Tuesday on his way home from school.
Officers tell us Trujillo stabbed her boyfriend with stiletto heel shoes.
Police say the suspect may be responsible for the murders of at least 6 women whose bodies have been found in or near the Acres Homes area.
Defense attorneys had argued that Yates was legally insane and grossly psychotic when she drowned the children. One by one, they described the deaths of the alleged other 8 victims of the convicted rail car killer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Evidence Room. This is a single episode that we're doing before we launch our new season later this month. We're going to have a whole new look, but right now we're focusing on the murder case of Farrah Fratta. And joining me is my colleague, Phil Archer. You covered this case. You covered the trial. It was her estranged husband, Robert Fratta.
Right. I covered one of the trials, and I have to admit, I'm having trouble remembering if it was his first or second. I think it was the second trial.
Which was in 2009. Yeah. It was the second trial. Okay, so let's kind of catch everybody up here. 1994, you have this young mother of 3, goes to her suburban home in Atascocita, pulls into the garage. Right. Someone walks up, shoots her twice in the head, kills her.
Right.
And that just stunned everybody.
What is your emergency?
Yes, I just saw a shooting, please.
Okay, do you know if anybody's been shot?
Yes, I see the lady. I see her garage right now.
Is somebody shot?
Yes.
Stay on the line. Let me connect to the ambulance service. Hold on.
I just saw a shooting.
You just saw a shooting?
Yes.
And what is your location?
I'm at 5411 Timbers Trail in Atascocita. You need to send an ambulance. She's down.
First of all, it's in a neighborhood where nothing like this ever happens.
Yeah. To a woman who would not even be suspected of being a target for any kind of violence like that.
Right.
There'd be no reason to target her.
So it was almost immediate. I mean, I think I was talking with you earlier. Right. Everybody automatically started looking at Robert Fratta, who went by Bob. So Bob Fratta, the estranged husband, because they were about 2 years into a pretty contentious divorce.
Right. Well, the police, of course, immediately started looking for people with means and motive. And I'm not sure there really was anybody who jumped to the top of the list immediately except Robert Fratta.
I'll never forget, they questioned him the night, naturally, and that's kind of Detective 101. Woman killed, you're going to look at close family, especially the estranged husband who's in the middle of a pretty contentious divorce and custody battle over the 3 children. So they bring him in. But one of the things that really stood out to me was what the detective said after they questioned him and released him, because you and I know, whenever we've interviewed detectives before anybody's charged, they try to play things pretty close to the vest. John Denholm, veteran detective, he made no bones about it.
He's lying. He's been lying all night. You know, there's no robbery. There's no sexual assault. There's no carjacking. Basically, you got a mother of 3 coming home from work at 8 o'clock in a low crime affluent subdivision in northeast Harris County, basically gets ambushed and shot execution style.
The thing that has always interested me, or I shouldn't say it that way, not interested, but surprised me, I guess, really, about this, is we're talking about a guy who's a certified police officer. He's been through the training, and he knows he should have known what police are going to be looking at, and that he was probably going to be one of their main suspects, at least one of their main suspects.
If you watch the interrogation video from that night, it was a detective, William Valerio, that was doing the interrogation that night, and they talked about that. I mean, like, he knew what he was doing, he knew what his rights were, he knew this was going, and they point blank, did you do this? course, he says no, but he says, I thought about that on the way over here. Geez, I hope they find who did this because I'm going to look suspicious. So, I'll never forget the detective in the interrogation who looks at him, just went, what's wrong with this picture?
Maybe she thought she was going to lose the custody of the kids. We're battling for custody. Yeah, right, yeah. Right. And that's why I figure, damn it, you figure I'm got something to do with it because we're battling for custody. So, I assume there was some kind of a custody settlement when you got your divorce. No, the divorce is finalized. I thought it was final. Was it going to be final? No. Well, we're supposed to have a trial towards the end of the month. Did you arrange to have your wife came? No, I did not. I'll put it this way too. If anything happens to her, that's one of the things I was thinking on the way over here. It's like, what the hell am I going to do now? Who made your wife love to kill her? Nobody I can think of. I can't think of a teacher. What's wrong with this picture? All I can say is, check her lifestyle. She went out clubbing a lot, got moved up, flunking a lot.
That question was so brilliant because it encapsulated so much in just a few amount of words. What's wrong with this picture?
Well, you don't even have to step back. When you look at all of the things that were wrong with that picture, here's a trained police officer who who had means and motive. His wife was a problem for him, and he was not quiet about that. Not only did he go after her that way, but he told everybody about it. He apparently had no valve. He went out and tried to recruit people to help him kill her at his gym.
Yeah, apparently it was everybody. Apparently everybody he talked to. It was well known that he wanted somebody to kill his wife.
Yeah.
He was tired of it. He said he kept telling everybody, "I'm tired of being broke. I'm tired of all this." And so, but let's back up just for a second, because when you go through the archives and there's all the things that are in there, one of the things, not just Detective 101, you suspect the estranged husband immediately following her death. They also found about $1,000 in cash in his car the night of his wife's murder. And what was that for? Well, it was for new carpet. Okay, but because remember, he had an alibi, and it was true. He was at church with his 3 children.
Right.
And it was, I thought that was particularly sad because that forced his oldest to have to testify at his own father's trial.
I do recall Bradley asking questions. He wanted to know, he says, "Daddy, why did you have all that money in your car?" Bradley was 9. He did testify in the trial.
What did he testify to exactly?
Daddy got up twice to use the telephone. Well, she correlated that with the 2 telephone calls on his cell phone.
Jessica, I'll never forget the burden that was put on those children. I remember talking to the social worker who supervised the first visits between Bob Fratta and his children right after Farah was murdered. And she said the thing that just broke everybody was his daughter, who was 4 at the time, pretty much walked around telling anybody who would listen that the bad guys put bullets into mommy's head.
Amber was the most vocal because she was the youngest and probably didn't really understand what she was saying. But I can remember her walking around the office and saying to anyone who would listen, the bad guys put bullets in my mommy's head. The boys were very quiet. They didn't say much. They wanted to know when they could live with him. Amber cried when he left and wanted just one more hug. When they both turned 18, they went to visit him one time.
And that was it.
They asked him one question, and he didn't answer it, and they left.
Well, I'm assuming the question was why?
Correct.
I can't understand how you can do that to a child. Meaning, like, how can you cause pain like that to your own children? I just don't understand it.
Well, as the prosecution laid out its case, there was a fair amount of evidence that suggested that Robert Fratta was an incredible narcissist, that he didn't really feel much empathy certainly not for his ex-wife, but you could extrapolate probably the kids were um, somewhat in that category as well. That it didn't matter. What mattered was relieving him of the pain he felt he was going through with his divorce. But when I say the plan seems a lot, the plan is all right. I'm going to go recruit the gym rats that I work out with to see if any of them will help me kill my wife.
Right.
And then we'll set it up, and I'll take the kids to church, and everything will be okay.
Well, you covered the trial. These people testified, but didn't any of these people go? Maybe I should call the police here?
I'll say this: I thought the prosecutors didn't hammer much on that. The question all of us would ask, anyone would ask, did it occur to you maybe that he was really going to go through with this, and that maybe you ought to bring the authorities in? They did ask those questions. They didn't embarrass them with them, and the answers were, let's just say, lacking. Some of them, I think.
Well, they all just think that he was just blowing off steam, just spouting off,
blowing off steam. But it seemed to me, I remember one. I won't say it because I can't remember precisely. I was going to say, it seemed to me I remember one who didn't make any excuse. Just said, no, it's his business, something along those lines.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So it was.
That's particularly sad because it seems like there was multiple points to have prevented her murder and these children losing their mother and their father by extension.
Yeah, I think most of us, if we're with an acquaintance who is seriously saying he wants to kill his wife, that we would pay attention to that
multiple times, not like just once.
No, over and over,
like over and over for weeks and weeks and weeks. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing. I mean, that was the thing that they brought out. I mean, it's just like he had said this so much because the defense tried to, I think, say, well, he was just venting, he was angry, it was a nasty divorce, custody battle kind of thing, and it was like, no, when you maybe you say that once, but when you over and over and over and over and over again do it, and it was okay. So he eventually comes across these guys, Joseph Price-Dash and Howard Guidry. Price-Dash, yes, was the go-between and the getaway driver. Guidry was the trigger man. We talk about well thought out too. This was something else that struck me going through the archives, and you see the pictures of the gun that was used to kill Farah. That was Frauda's gun. Gave the hitman a gun that he had purchased. I mean,
and I'm laughing. I mean,
I know it's not. I know it's absurd.
It's absurd. Who does that?
But what came out is because at first when I was going through, I was looking at there was photos and evidence, and it was of a bank. I'm like, what? Why am I seeing a bank here? Does that have nothing to do with a bank robbery? Maybe that's where he withdrew. Right. No, turns out Guidry had been picked up for bank robbery, and he was arrested, and he used a gun in the bank robbery. Well, when they start putting together the whole Price-Dash Guidry connection, they suddenly realize, hey, this gun and this serial number is in our evidence room. And it's a gun that had been bought by Robert Frauda. And then, of course, you know how in jail they record phone calls, right? Well, they recorded some of Guidry's phone calls. And, we're going to need to take a quick break, but we'll get back to some of those recorded calls between Guidry, the trigger man, and this other person.
I think you could say that solving this crime was not the toughest nut county detectives ever had to crack.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, we'll get to that when we come back. Welcome back to the evidence room. We're talking about the murder of Farah Frauda. Her estranged husband, Bob Frauda, was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of his wife, the mother of his 3 children. With me is Phil Archer, longtime veteran journalist at KPRC2. We were talking about, you'd said before the break, you had talked about it may not have been the toughest nut to crack. Well, it wasn't quite that easy. I mean, there was a lot because there was a lot of circumstantial. Yes, you had Bob Frauda going around telling everybody who would listen he wanted to find a hitman. They had phone calls, but what it turned out was the phone calls that Frauda made, the night of the murder, went to a woman's phone by the name of Mary Gibb. who turned out to be Price Dash's girlfriend.
Mm.
And at first, she wouldn't say anything. Like it basically took them threatening her with, okay, we're just going to charge you with Farrah's murder.
Right.
Before she was like, oh, wait a minute, I'll talk.
Well,
right.
She would have been an accomplice, you'd have to say.
Yeah, she didn't plan it, she didn't do anything with it, but
she wasn't involved in actually carrying it out. She was helping cover up.
Right. And I know that was a linchpin in that case.
Right. But what I mean, it wasn't the toughest nut to crack. Yeah, it took a while to pull all the ends together to prove the case. But from the get-go, there was no, as far as the cops were concerned, there was no real mystery here. They had a very solid suspect from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so they just pursued that as hard as they had.
And they tailed him. I mean, like you go through it and you see they tailed him like day after day after day. They knew what was going on. And we had talked, and so right before the break, we were also talking about Guidry, the man who's been convicted of being the trigger man, who actually shot and killed Farrah. The gun was actually purchased by Friday. Well, and it was interesting because when he was in jail, he was talking to somebody, and you know how they record those phone calls in jail.
Well, how come they use that gun against you? Because you had Gideon's gun. What's his name? Price Dash's gun, right?
Actually, the gun comes from not Friday. I think it's Friday. Friday gave the gun to Price Dash. But my fact is, they found the gun at least 4 months after the crime.
Yeah.
So, 4 months after the crime, so my stance is the gun was purchased from Price Dash. There's money, there's the vehicle, there's things that tied to me.
So how much is that gun worth?
I don't know, man.
I mean, I don't know. I've never bought a gun in my life.
Probably 120 hours.
So you're going to go kill somebody for a gun that's worth $100?
Right, a gun. And
how much did you pay that?
Well,
or did you?
I did.
And so you're listening to it, and he's like, you know, well, this person's asking, well, how can they connect you? Is it the gun? Wasn't that Price Dash's gun? No, I later found out that was actually Frada's gun, and Frada gave it to Price Dash. I mean, so they openly talked about it.
Right.
And so it was very strange. And for the first trial, I believe both confessed to their roles, Guidry and Price Dash.
I think that's correct too.
You don't remember? I think they even paraded Guidry in during the first trial to be identified. So then there was the retrial. The reason he was on death row for so long is he won a retrial. My superficial understanding of the legalities is the Criminal Court of Appeals looked at and ruled that Price Dash and Guidry's confessions were taken and they were used during the first trial, but they weren't called as witnesses to testify. Therefore, the defense couldn't cross-examine. Ergo, those confessions should never have been allowed. And of course, so we got this new trial in 2009, and that's I believe that's the one you
went to. And I had not been at the first one. The testimony I thought was sort of astounding that everybody involved in this was so open about it, and just
meaning how many people he had asked for a hitman.
People not just that. It seemed like every time he went to work out, he had something bad to say about his wife, about how much trouble his wife was, or ex-wife, how much he wanted to be rid of her. And then it would just be a quick jump to, well, I need to get rid of her and start looking for accomplices. Who does that?
Well, but the other thing is too, you talked about him being a narcissist, and I know he was a police officer, but it was a weird position that doesn't exist anymore. It was in Missouri City. It was called a public safety officer. So he was like a hybrid police officer firefighter, which was very strange.
Yeah.
And I remember even during his interrogation the night of the murder, he was coming up with all these cockamamie stories. Well, maybe it's somebody, who I've arrested and da-da-da. And the detective point blank looked at him and he goes,
why is everybody messing with me? I don't understand. You think I do? Yeah, all I can do is I'm a homicide investigator. I've been working pretty much for 4 years now. I worked as a detective for 6 years before that. I've arrested hundreds, more than 2,000 people and nobody's ever come to my house and messed with me. It's not. You're right. Yeah, I noticed that.
In other words, they were like, okay, you say you're a police officer, but you are not. We are not in the same field.
Yeah, and I mean, it was pretty clear from all that. Robert Ferraro lived in a kind of a different place than most people.
Well, he fancied himself quite the ladies' man.
Well, that I think he probably. I think Ferraro thought he was a little more intelligent than the average guy as well, and that he was just going to be able to bull through this because, like I say, the planning. I mean, the planning he had wasn't much of a plan, and it pretty well fell apart about 10 seconds after police started questioning him about all this.
And I think one of the things that struck me too is when he left the interrogation the morning after.
Yeah.
He was all smiles.
Not at all. I didn't get to make any phone calls. I didn't get fed until 2 o'clock. I didn't cover detention since 9:30 last night. I was beat. So this has not been a very pleasant experience. Yes. Probably not. Well, I mean, they hit you, chest and kicked you in the legs and stuff like that. But, one of the sergeants, the other sergeant, what I asked for a superior officer, I was handcuffed to a chair. I cooperated fully. I was handcuffed tight and fully. This was pretty ridiculous. And like I said, I'm going to cooperate fully with everything.
How do you think they believe you did it?
Well, if I got shot, I'm sure Farr would be the suspect of that. I mean, that to me is natural. I was totally understanding about that. I would suspect myself too if I was doing an investigation. That's only natural.
Andy Kahn even said this. Victims' rights. Andy Kahn, he said the one thing I'll never get out of his mind is him smiling into the cameras after that. And you look at that piece of video, and it is disturbing. Knowing what you know now in hindsight, you can suspect that day, but looking back at him doing that smile less than 24 hours after his estranged wife, the mother of his children, was killed execution style.
Well, I remember that, and you may remember it better, but the impression I think I took away from that was he really enjoyed being on camera.
Oh,
that he
clearly
was enjoying the attention. It seems to me that he initiated a couple of sessions with reporters.
Yeah, he wouldn't stop talking. There was a while there where you couldn't stop him from talking. And which is interesting because I did put in a request to interview him on death row, and he declined. And even some of the prison officials were like, that's kind of surprised us because usually he talks to everybody. He declined at the end there.
Right.
I also put in a request to interview Price Dash and Guidry. They also declined because both of them are on death row as well, which is a rarity to see 3 people on death row stemming from the same crime. But Price Dash and Guidry's execution dates have not yet been set, but they're on death row as well. So we go to the 2009 retrial, and it ended the same way.
Right.
He convicted,
Yeah.
sentenced to death. I remember in particular speaking with Judy Cox, that was the social worker who supervised the visits between Ferraro and his children right after Farrar's murder. She remained very close with the family, as did Andy Kahn.
Yeah.
And she said that second trial really took its toll, because one thing I don't think people realize is the absolute emotional toll that it takes on family members, because not only do you have that horrible trauma of losing a loved one in an incredibly violent way, but then you have to relive it for the trial.
Right.
And then you get a retrial, and you have to relive it all over again. And they were terrified. What if the second jury found him not guilty?
Right.
Would he just literally walk free at that point? And they were thinking about, the 3 children, because the grandparents adopted the 3 children and raised them. And it was particularly awful because Farrar's father, Lex Backer, passed away. And he had talked about how devastating it was that they went through the retrial, and he was grateful that he was convicted again and sentenced to death again.
He never got over it. I just felt so sorry for Lex and Betty having to go through that again.
I just lost something that was so precious. She was always my baby.
But then I remember Andy Kahn witnessed the execution because he had made a promise to the father, Lex.
I didn't remember that.
Yes.
Andy was there.
Yes, saying that basically Lex said, if I can't be there for the execution,
If I cannot be there, will you go in my place? Because I want to make sure that this actually happens. There's certain cases that deserve the death penalty. And Bob Frada's right at the top of the list. He is an evil, sadistic man.
You know, you talk about the narcissism with him, even later on as he's on death row, I read some letters that he had written to a print reporter. It wasn't the Chronicle, it was a small neighborhood newspaper that was covering the case. And even then, he was writing things like, hey, if you lost 10 pounds, you'd be pretty good looking. It's just like, oh man, it's like, really?
Yeah.
You're on death row, and I don't know. I don't understand people. It's hard to fathom the depths of that depravity.
Yeah, well, he's I would say that he's oblivious. Again, it goes to empathy, and he doesn't. He demonstrated, at least what I saw in court, that he doesn't have much, and he doesn't. It's not that he's ignoring those things that most average people feel. He just doesn't. They're not on his radar. He doesn't feel them. They don't even suggest themselves. Kind of sympathy. I mean, wouldn't you think about the effect that was going to have on your children?
Well, that's what I kept saying. You've got to know that you're hurting your children. You're going to devastate your children. You're causing lifelong trauma to your children because of this. The father, Judy Cox, the father never got over it. Not that any father will ever get over the death, or any parent gets over the death of a child, but just he never.
These things we're talking about that are so horrific that, first of all, you kill somebody because you're not getting along with them. That's pretty horrific.
Yeah, Phil, thanks for being here.
Yeah,
it's always great.
My pleasure, pal.